All right, everyone, welcome back to the Royville movie house. We just got out of the theater and all my popcorn is gone, so I guess it's time to talk about another one of the top 50 best movies of all time, The Searchers.
Yes, The Searchers from 1956 was rated number 12 on AFI's top 100 list, but we're only doing the top 50, so number 12 on top 50. It is directed by John Ford, written by Frank S. Nugent for the screenplay, and it's based on the book by Alan LeMay. It does star a number of different people, most notably John Wayne as Ethan Edwards, and Jeffrey Hunter as Martin Powley? I don't remember how they were saying it in the movie.
Neither do I.
Those were the two main characters. They were the Searchers. But also starring Vera Mills as Lori Jorgensen, Ward Bond as Reverend Captain Samuel Johnston Clayton, Natalie Wood as Debbie Edwards at age 15, and Lars Jorgensen was John Quaylen. There was a number of others, but I think I'm just going to skip it because we'll talk a little bit about their characters during the plot summary, but most of the characters were fairly standard Western tropes, which is unfair to say about this movie because this movie was one of the movies that established the tropes that happen in Western movies. So we'll just dive right in and talk about the plot. Ethan Edwards comes home after serving with the Confederate Army in the Civil War. The movie starts when it's 1868, so it's 3 years-ish after the surrender.
Yeah, so, by the way, he did not surrender. He still had his cavalry sword, and there was a major, not confrontation, but discussion about how he would not be someone that gave up his sword. And so the war had been done for 3 years. You're kind of led to believe that he'd been doing something for that 3 years, but it's never really clear what.
That's true. He does have an awful lot of knowledge about the land and the people who live on the land, though, so there's that. But Ethan Edwards, this is the first major event of the movie. Ethan Edwards comes home to his brother's home, and he meets the new family members because Debbie is like 8 at this point, so he's been gone for a while. He thinks that Debbie is her sister Lucy. There's a number of different things. So there's a big to-do, and then the next day, the Texas Rangers come through. I'm trying to...
I think the captain / preacher was a Texas Ranger as well. Maybe he was a captain of the Rangers or the Marshals. I'm not really sure how that went because they just were kind of throwing out titles left and right.
Well, he was Reverend Captain in the cast list, so...
So maybe he was captain of the Marshals or Texas Rangers or... I think they played that a little fast and loose.
It was odd. It was a very odd scene. It was like 20 people stamping through their kitchen, eating stuff, drinking coffee, sitting in the rocking chairs, and a whole lot of exposition got dropped. Basically, Mr. Jorgensen, Lars Jorgensen, his cattle were stolen in the night. So Captain Samuel Johnston Clayton comes through and swears in Ethan's brother, whose name is Aaron. It's Aaron. Swears in Aaron and the adopted boy named Martin. And they go off to find who stole the cattle, which they're pretty sure it's the local Comanche tribe. So all the men ride off, except for Aaron, who stays back behind on Ethan's insistence to protect the homestead. They ride off about 40 miles, which just seems like a really long way.
On horseback, that's about a day if you play role-playing games.
But they ride out for about a day, figure out that it's likely a ruse to get everybody away from their homesteads so they could hit the homesteads.
Well, John Wayne's character thought that.
Yeah, so they all ride back to the Jorgensens and the Edwardses, and it turns out they hit the Edwards' house, not the Jorgensens. So when they get back to the Edwards house, Ma and Pa Edwards, Aaron and his wife and their son are all found dead. They have like a teenage son. He's like 13-ish, Ben. And they're all found dead. But the two girls, Lori, who is a teenager or a young lady, and Debbie, who is a little girl, roughly 8 or 9, they are taken. So they go galloping off to search for the two girls. Along the way, they get into a confrontation with the Comanche that injures one of them, Jorgensen, I believe, and they have to take him back to the homesteads, and they leave Martin and Lori's beau, Brad, and Ethan to go. Basically, they determine that it takes a small band or a really big band of soldiers to do what they need to do, which is basically either infiltrate very quietly, get the girls out, and leave, or take a regiment of soldiers in, attack, and get the girls out and leave. So one or the other, and they figured the numbers they had, they were too few and not enough. So they left the 3 to go do the infiltration, and along the way, they found Lori dead. Well, Ethan found Lori dead. And Brad went off when he found out, and basically did suicide by... the Wild West version of suicide by cop. He ran off to attack the Comanche tribe and got shot dead, knowing full well that's probably what was going to happen. So that left Ethan and Martin as the 2 searchers. And they track this tribe through the country for a couple of years and then come back.
Yeah, for a couple of years. A lot of the movie is them doing various scenes of talking to people, writing, finding leads, and basically searching for Debbie.
Right. Who they assume is still alive. Because Martin pretty much has to assume that she's alive, otherwise he'd fall apart. He's pretty much falling apart anyway. Martin, as a baby, his parents were killed by Comanche, and Ethan found him, and Aaron and his wife raised Martin as their own. So he's not technically an Edwards. He is a Polly. So he's riding with Ethan, who's actually quite mean to him through the whole thing. I know Steve said yesterday it's because he was a hardened man, but it comes across as being kind of unlikable because Martin doesn't do anything to really deserve the treatment he gets.
To Ellen, it comes off as being unlikable.
All right. That's what I was saying. Fine. To Ellen.
He's just a man's man. He's John Wayne.
He does say a whole lot. That'll be the day. I think he said that like 5 times throughout the whole thing, which was fun. That'll be the day. Anyway, so they leave to go search again because somebody sent a clue closer to New Mexico-ish. So they go in that direction and meet with the store, the general store outpost owner, who ends up just having sent it basically to roll Ethan for his money. And so they come out and ambush them. But John Wayne's character, being John Wayne's character, figures out that's what's happening. So uses Martin as a piece of bait, and the band of outlaws attacks, and they all die. So they're left with nothing, pretty much at that point. So they decide to go to an Indian outpost and do some trading. And in the process of doing some trading some hats and different trinkets just to keep relations open so they can maybe get some information. In the process of the trading, Martin ends up with a wife. And... kind
of a comical scene. He basically was thinking he was trading for a blanket, and he was actually trading for a woman. And then there's kind of a comical scene of him realizing that, and Ethan, John Wayne's character, making fun of him, and then...
Yeah, that whole thing doesn't really stand up to the test of time that much. It's not that it was flat out racist. Last night I did say it was racist, but I don't think it was flat out racist, but it definitely was a sign of the times. That scene would not have been in a modern Western. At least not in the form that it took. So that's neither here nor there. This was made in 1956. It was a different time. They did look at cowboys and Indians a little differently than we do. So that happened. They end up in New Mexico where they find one of the crazy guys, the crazy guy who's a part of the band back home, who gives him some information and leads him directly to the tribe of Comanche that has Debbie. A Mexican trader takes him out there. But it turns out that the chief, named Scar, knows that they're coming and knows what they're there for. So the Mexican trader gets spooked and basically is like, you guys need to run. And Ethan was like, nope, not gonna. And the Mexican guy's like, I'm sorry, I can't stay. And so they get attacked after Debbie runs out to try to warn them to run. But Debbie tells them that this is my people now. Because at this point, she's been there for 5 years. And is married to Scar, I think.
And it's really odd that these are my people, I'm not leaving, and then later on in the movie, she's like, okay, thank you for rescuing me. But at this point, I don't know, maybe they needed more run time. She kind of fights them about wanting to leave, and then they have to run because all of the Comanches now are following them, and they're basically running for their lives without Debbie.
So they do run.
And Ethan's character, his character John Wayne, wants to shoot Debbie because she's now a Comanche. She is no longer the white woman Debbie.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with, like, it would be humane to do that in his mind. But they don't really explore that a whole lot. But I bet it has something to do with abduction stories that have happened throughout the United States' history. People who've been abducted by Indian tribes end up going a little crazy because of, Stockholm syndrome and things like that, where you start to sympathize with the people who took you captive and
Ethan wasn't having it. Of course, he didn't like Native Americans. He had a thing against them, definitely a thing against the Comanche. So that's, I think, also played into the fact that he wanted to take Debbie out. And his traveling partner basically was like, no, you can't do that. And then the group of Comanche kind of ride into the scene and they have to run for their lives, leaving Debbie behind.
So they run. They go back home to the homesteads, the Jorgensen homestead specifically. In the process of all this, we've kind of skipped past kind of a subplot. Marty is involved with the Jorgensen's daughter, Lori, who is hot-tempered. A Texas woman is what I'm kind of gathering. But she is in love with Marty, and Marty's in love with her. But Marty won't say it because she's supposed to already know it. In the process of this whole thing, he writes home, and the only event he basically writes home about is the fact that he got married to this Indian woman.
Well, there were other things that he discussed, but that's what they really took their time on.
So Lori accepts the proposal of a traveling salesman, I think he was.
I honestly have no idea what he was. He played the guitar and sang, is all I know.
And his name was Charlie. And he laughed like, haw, haw, haw.
And he talked really weird all the time. Almost as if he wasn't a real person. Which was, once again, odd for the movie, but okay.
Yeah, it was really weird. And I did have to laugh at his laugh every time he laughed, because he actually said, ha, ha, ha. He didn't laugh. It was weird. So, the day they come back, of course, is Lori's wedding day. So, Lori and Marty have a confrontation, because as Marty's going in, Lori's coming downstairs in her wedding gown. They talk, they work things out, and in comes her fiance, and Marty and Charlie get into a fist fight, which was a comical scene as well, in that before they start, Marty helps him take off his good coat. They have to save a fiddle from the band. They have to, there's like all kinds of, they were very gentlemanly about beating the crap out of each other.
Yeah, there was a little comedy thrown into the movie at that with their spat for the woman that they both love.
And then Charlie basically says to Lori, you gotta choose, and she of course chooses Marty, and then a lieutenant from the local regiment comes to report
that they found Scar and that they're sending a team out. And so Ethan's like, we're going, and the captain, the priest captain, says that we're going and you're not going to stop us. You can help us if you want, but we're going in guns blazing, basically.
Yeah, they had a score to settle and they needed to get Debbie. And they're really close to the homestead. So, then fast forward to the next day, the lieutenant actually comes back and rides in with them.
Once again, the lieutenant kind of played for comic relief.
Ish, yeah. He's serving in the regiment with his dad being the captain. He's a young man. I believe he's actually played by John Wayne's son, Patrick Wayne. So he's a young man and kind of green and takes out his sword a lot. And the captain is nervous around him with his saber out. But anyway, he rides in with them. Good on him. They go in. Marty finds Debbie, tries to get her out, kills Scar in the process because Scar comes back to the tent. They go running, and a bunch of stuff happens. Basically,
there's a big battle between the cowboys and the Indians.
And then in the process, Marty and Debbie get away, and they're in a cave hiding place, and Ethan finds them, and Ethan comes running to Debbie, Marty yelling, no, 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 because Marty's pretty convinced that Ethan's going to kill her. But instead, Marty lifts her up like he did when he was a little girl and just says, come on, let's go home. And they ride home.
And then everybody gets home. There's this big celebration, basically, as everybody in the house is running out to kind of congratulate the heroes as they're riding up. There's this kind of ending scene where it is framed by the door. Everything else besides the kind of the frame, the arch, is kind of dark. And everybody is kind of seen, almost kind of reminded me of like the end of a play where everybody's kind of coming
like
out and taking their bow. Well, they're kind of coming into the house. So the parents will come into the house, and Debbie will come into the house. The new young couple comes into the house together, and then Ethan, John Wayne, starts to kind of come towards the door. And, kind of like that Plains Drifter, the man's man, he turns around and starts to walk away as he's going to his next adventure or whatever as the lone cowboy. And the door kind of closes on the scene.
That's the plot.
There you go. Okay.
All right. So the characters. I think that this should be very quick. Ethan is John Wayne. Every character that John Wayne plays is Ethan. Ethan is John Wayne. I don't know how else to say it. He's a man's man. He's tough. He's seen some stuff. He speaks slowly with his little drawl.
That'll be the day you get something over on me, Pilgrim.
Right. And it fits really well into the Western genre. Like, it's a slow talk, it's a swagger, he's cool. He's tough, and he's cool. So, that's Ethan. I mean, he does care about his family, but he's really closed off. That's about it.
I mean, you can tell, especially as the movie goes on, that Ethan does really care. It's just that he's been at war, he's been off doing his own thing, so he's not a lover, he's a fighter.
Yeah, he's seen some stuff.
Yeah.
Martin is the other main character. Martin Poley. He's a young foundling who was raised from the time he was a screaming infant/toddler to adulthood by the Edwards family, because his family was killed by Comanche. He's soft. He loves his family. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He's a kid.
The sidekick.
He's definitely a kid. Yeah.
The Robin to John Wayne's Batman.
And he disagrees with John Wayne quite a bit. There's a lot of the scenes with them are him yelling at him to be nicer to him, or him yelling at him because he disagrees with how he handled something. But throughout the whole thing, John Wayne's Ethan starts to soften to him. Martin's the more accessible character for the audience, I believe.
Oh, definitely.
So there's that. Then you have the Jorgensens, who are neighbors to the Edwards. Lars Jorgensen is
just a rancher family. I mean, there's not really, in my opinion, there's not much more to say about them.
Mrs. Jorgensen's the tough lady, the tough old lady who
was a teacher.
Yeah, they keep saying that. But Mrs. Jorgensen and Lori are obviously purebred American. Lars is an immigrant, I believe, since it's Jorgensen spelled with the J, from a Scandinavian country. He talks about how the country's really hard on the cattle, which it would be. I'll get to that later. But how it's just really hard to be in that country. And his wife is just like, it's going to get easier. It might take us going into the ground, but this country is big country. We're Texicans. That's what they call themselves. Texicans. And that's the way it is. So Texicans are tough and they stick it out. The Edwards family, again, they were only in a couple of scenes. Aaron Edwards and his wife, ranchers, just like the Jorgensens. The Jorgensens we got to spend a little bit more time with. There was a little bit more personality. But the Edwards family was Aaron stoic and a rancher. He does his work. He's quiet. His wife is, I think, kind of in love with Ethan was the idea. She took real good care of his stuff. And, but Ethan rode off and left them, and then they end up dying. I know that sounds awful, but the dog didn't end up dying. I was going to actually probably have to check out if the dog ended up dying. I know that sounds bad, but he was a good puppy. They sent, once they figured out the Comanche were getting ready to attack, they sent Debbie to a hiding place, and that's how everybody else died or got taken. They found Debbie by happenstance, and so she got taken.
Because they pretty much rode right up on her.
Pretty much. The hiding place was not that great.
Horrible hiding spot.
But the Edwards family were pretty much an average, standard pioneering family. I don't know what else to say about them. The Reverend Captain Samuel was fun. He was the Reverend, so you always had to ask him if he was asking questions as the Reverend or as the Captain of the Texas Rangers. He was gung-ho in both of his positions. I don't know. I mean, he was just fun. He was just a fun character. He had
most of the side characters were just there as caricatures of something or other.
My favorite of the caricatures was Mose, who was the crazy one that they find later in the plot near New Mexico. That all he wanted, poor guy, all he wanted was to sit in a rocking chair in front of a fireplace. Like, literally, he didn't want payment. That's all he wanted. And so through the whole thing, that's basically he's doing everything he can to just be able to sit in that rocking chair by the fireplace.
Yeah, it was odd because in the beginning he's in the scene where everybody's kind of coming into the house and everybody's talking at the same time, and he's like in the rocking chair and everything, and then it just seems like he's part of the guys that come in, part of the posse or whatever, and then you come to find out he actually has a mental disability, and it was just weird that they threw that in there, but
Scar was scary. That's all I can say about him.
He's meant to be scary. Obviously, it's a 1950s movie, so he's not as scary as... Mm-hmm. But he's meant to be the stoic Comanche killer, basically.
Although he did have a funny line. Ethan tells him, because he speaks English at one point, Ethan tells him, "You speak American well. Did somebody teach you that?" And so, as they're walking in to do their trading, quote-unquote trading, Scar says, "You speak Comanche well. Somebody teach you that?" So, yeah, he got a chuckle out of me, but he was still pretty frightening. They did a good job with direction of him. I don't know a whole lot about Comanche culture, so I don't know how well they captured that, but as far as the caricature that 50s Westerns gave us, they did a good job of staying consistent in their own culture that they created. But the only other Native American that really had any sort of play was Look, who was Marty's wife.
Yeah.
And she was sweet. And as accommodating as she could be until they brought up the name Scar and she got scared and ran away. So there you go. Those are all the characters that go into the plot, that factor into the plot. Well, Lieutenant Greenbush or whatever his name was, he actually won the only award that this movie won, Golden Globe for Best Newcomer. He was fun, but he was only in like 3 scenes.
Yeah, true.
So, I mean, he was just a wet behind the ears lieutenant in the army.
And totally played for comic relief.
Pretty much. They made fun of him reporting to his dad as his commanding officer. Go tell your pa. Instead of go tell your captain, go tell your pa.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of that. But after the movie was over last night, I did have a hard time figuring out how I liked the movie. I have seen it one other time before in a film class I took in college, but that was 20 years ago, and I didn't remember a whole lot about it, whether I liked it or not. I didn't even remember really the plot. I knew they were searching for a kidnapped girl, but I couldn't remember even if it was a kidnapped by Indians or by outlaws, or that was about the only thing I remembered about it. I will say, John Ford really, really likes Texas, or the landscape of the West. There's a whole lot of time spent painting the...
That's one of the tropes, though. That's the Western trope.
Well, John Ford was one of the pioneers in developing that trope. This movie is very epic in its sweeping shots of Texas and the West, with the rock formations and the plant life and even the wildlife to a certain extent. He almost spends as much time developing the landscape kind of almost like a character, as much time as he spends with the other characters. Like, it's developed just as much as Ethan is, almost like a character. You see how rough it is, all of the canyons and mountains and hills, and how dry it is, and how inhospitable it is, but it's beautiful. And
right.
I don't know how else to describe it. But John Ford movies are all very similar in scope like this, because he loved his Western landscape. He loved the West. Pretty much everything about it. That's one of the things, and you can tell every movie that he does, it's just these huge sweeping things, and he films it in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico in order to actually, on site get some of these things. Like you said, they lived right next to Devil's Tower.
Yeah, well, it looked like Devil's Tower. But then again, there's probably a lot of rock formations like that look like Devil's Tower. But
I mean, where they
especially if they're in Texas, it probably wasn't.
But I mean, it's a beautiful movie to look at, is all I'm trying to say. It's beautiful, especially if you like the rugged Western landscape. Complete with cactus and sagebrush, and I mean, it's a beautiful movie to look at. The plot is more of a character treatment than it is actually a action-packed Western.
Yeah, there's not as much action as you would think in more of a modern movie. A lot of it is them kind of talking to each other, searching for Debbie, getting into hijinks, whether it's with the family back home or with people they encounter as they are searching for Debbie. There's really, in the 2-hour movie, there's maybe, I would say, 3 or 4 good fight scenes, shooting scenes, Western shootouts and stuff. And for the length of the movie, especially from a more modern perspective, it seemed like then, to me, that there wasn't a lot of action going on.
Yeah, and even without like shooting or whatever, there wasn't even really that much forward momentum of the plot action. It was a lot of talking. It was still a good movie. It was still well done. It just wasn't, I mean, even a slower Western like Unforgiven in the modern times still has more forward momentum of the plot. It doesn't stall out. And I think this movie did stall out quite a few times where we were just kind of watching them on their search. Like we weren't. Modern storytelling gives audiences clues when there's like a mystery or a tracking thing. The Searchers really didn't. We got the clues as they got the clues. We had no idea what was happening a lot of the times. So there's that. But I will say that as much as I do like John Wayne, I don't think he's that great of an actor. I think he's the actor of the same caliber as Jack Nicholson or Nicolas Cage, who plays kind of the same character over and over and over again. Character's cool, and it fits really well in the movies that he's cast in. The directors knew what they were doing, and it's not really any insult to anybody who likes John Wayne. It's just I don't think he's an Oscar-worthy actor at this point, at least as far as the stuff that I've been seeing from him.
Well, and me on the other side of it, I mean, I think he was just fine in the movie. I think his acting ability, the way he portrayed his character was very fitting with everybody else's acting in the movie. So I think, honestly, I think it fit very well. I can't say from the movie that I thought he was a bad actor, because seeing this movie and realizing it's from a different time, it made me kind of think, well, maybe that's the way people acted in that time. And so it definitely, for me, he fit the other actors' portrayals, and as a cohesive movie, it worked for me.
It worked. I just feel that I need to say that it's not that I'm not going to enjoy John Wayne movies. I really do. I love Westerns. I even like John Wayne Westerns with the pretty standard, almost all of his Western movies are pretty standard tropey Westerns. And he plays not stranger, because he never plays the stranger, but he does play the long lost blank, long lost brother, long lost friend, long lost, and he's seen some stuff, and he comes to town and he's tough, and then he takes out the bad guys, because that's what John Wayne does. Mm-hmm. And that's what this movie represents, is kind of the beginning of an American movie trope, an American movie genre. And there's a number of them, but the Western movie is most definitely an American movie genre. it's based around being in the American West. So it's pretty much the only one that is strictly American. And so to say John Wayne is not a great actor, that's all fine and good. But he was a part of establishing a very American art form.
Yes.
John Ford as well. Shoot, lots and lots of other actors. But when you think of Western, you think of John Wayne. You think of the scope of John Ford. You may not think the name John Ford, but you do have images that come to mind from John Ford. So this is almost certainly why The Searchers is on this list, and why it's on the list at number 12, which is really high up, is that this is a perfect example of a genre Western. It doesn't really stray from... It's kind of like, to make kind of a similar thing, the first Halloween movie is the first slasher flick. And because these are like the first movies, they don't stray from the tropes. They check every box. Period. Because they're not experimenting with the format, they're establishing the format. So, that's why, in my opinion, the AFI, the American Film Institute, rated it so high on their list.
Yeah, I mean, it's the standard Western. It's the, like Ellen said, it hits the tropes. It hits the huge sweeping vistas. The man with a past that is fighting whatever group that is attacking basically the American white man values. I mean, it's whether it's the outlaw gunmen, the Indians, the Union Army against the Confederate, the lone Confederate soldier, a la some Clint Eastwood movies. It hits all of those. It hits many, if not all of those tropes of the Western film, and I think the reason that this one is on it is because it hits so many of those tropes. American Westerns are an institution of a type of film, and so this being one not only that hits all of those buttons, but being a John Wayne film and a John Ford film, it had to have been on the list.
Mm-hmm. And John Ford and John Wayne had a team up, had a partnership that lasted quite a few films, but this one is the film that just personifies everything that they worked together to kind of build. I don't know how much John Wayne had to say in like the actual framing of a shot or anything like that, but he definitely created that character. The loner with the past. I mean, he created that character, and many other actors came to perfect that character. And I mean, Clint Eastwood basically played the same character over and over again in all of his spaghetti westerns too. Because you have to, in an American, well, I guess spaghetti western's technically not an American movie. It's an Italian movie, but whatever. But in an American Western movie, you have to have the stranger with a past. Or the guy who's been gone so long, he's now a stranger with a past. Otherwise, some of the stuff just doesn't work. Some of the other tropes just don't work. So Westerns are a thing that I really enjoy. Probably not as much as Steve does, but I do enjoy Western movie.
I do like a good Western.
So I'm going to say that The Searchers do deserve to be on the list. It is, however, one of the first movies that we reviewed that did not get a nod from the Academy for anything. So that was an interesting dichotomy after, I mean, even Lord of the Rings got some nods on special effects and things like that, but 1956 was a little early for things like special effects. So, like, they didn't even get some of the technical Oscars that were available then. I don't know what they were up against that year, but honestly, acting probably wasn't deserved in the Academy, but I think the writing probably could have been, or the directing could have been. So, I don't know. But it was an interesting thing to kind of see a pop culture movie, period, as opposed to an icon movie like Streetcar Named Desire. So this is our first pop culture only movie, pretty much.
So, did you like the movie?
I think so. I did. I would have liked, because I am used to a more modern storytelling. I would have liked to have had some more forward movement of the plot during the course of the 2 hours. But overall, I really did enjoy it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. Ellen, like Ellen said, and like I agreed, that I am a big Western fan. However, most of the Westerns that I have seen have been Westerns made within my lifetime. So we're talking Tombstone, Wyatt Earp, Young Guns, and one of my favorite movies of all time, Open Range. So it is interesting to see kind of where those movies came from, kind of their ancestor. And yes, it was a little slower than I usually like. However, I thought that it was very interesting. I thought that it was great to see where some of my favorite movies came from. And once again, like Ellen said, I wish there would have been a little bit of forward progression. It was interesting that there was so much time spent on them kind of searching and not really gaining anything from it. But overall, I thought it was a fun movie and would watch something like it again.
Oh, good. There's a lot of John Ford movies out there that you can watch and enjoy.
That's true. That's true.
Next week, we will be reviewing a bad movie called Dracula vs. Frankenstein from the 70s. So it's an actual MGM monster movie.
We'll see if there's any disco.
Probably not. It's Dracula, and it's Lon Chaney. So actually, it should be a lot of fun. Should be. But I've not seen this movie, so it might be awful. I don't know.
All right. Well, that being said, it does look like they are lighting the lamps on the streets of Royville. So without further ado, everyone stay safe out there and have a good evening.
Bye-bye.